On January 8, 2026, President Donald Trump stunned the world with an announcement that would send shockwaves through international politics and security circles. The news broke in the early hours, catching both the American public and global leaders off guard, as speculation swirled about what the president would say. In a move that marked a dramatic escalation in the U.S. war on drugs, Trump revealed a new phase of operations. The administration, already known for its tough rhetoric, now signaled a willingness to take unprecedented action, raising the stakes in a conflict that has spanned decades and crossed borders. Appearing live on Fox News, Trump addressed the nation and the world. He declared that the United States would no longer limit its efforts to intercepting drug shipments at sea or targeting traffickers in transit. Instead, he announced that the U.S. military and intelligence agencies would begin striking drug cartels directly on land, inside foreign territories if necessary. The announcement immediately dominated headlines and social media feeds, with millions reacting in real time. Many Americans expressed support for a tougher stance, while others expressed concern about the risks of military intervention abroad. "We are going to start now hitting land with regard to the cartels," Trump said, his tone resolute. He went on to claim, "The cartels are running Mexico," suggesting that the threat had grown so severe that only direct action could stem the tide of drugs and violence reaching American communities. The announcement, however, was light on specifics. Trump offered few details about the scope, timing, or targets of the new policy. This ambiguity left both U.S. allies and adversaries scrambling to interpret the administration's intentions. Diplomats and analysts convened emergency meetings, trying to assess the potential fallout and what it might mean for regional stability. The move comes on the heels of recent U.S. actions in Venezuela, where American forces have already demonstrated a more assertive posture. Many observers see this as part of a broader strategy, signaling that the U.S. is prepared to project power deeper into Latin America in pursuit of its anti-drug objectives. The Trump administration frames this escalation as a necessary step to protect American lives and communities from the devastating impact of drug trafficking. Yet critics warn that such actions could ignite new conflicts, strain relations with neighboring countries, and challenge the sovereignty of nations across the region. The debate over the wisdom and legality of these strikes is already raging. As the world watches with bated breath, a period of heightened tension begins. The United States stands poised to take the war on drugs onto foreign soil, raising urgent questions about the future of international cooperation, regional security, and the true cost of this new chapter in the ongoing struggle. In a move that stunned both allies and adversaries, President Trump announced a dramatic new phase in the U.S. campaign against drug cartels. This land strike directive, delivered from the White House, signaled a fundamental change in American strategy, one that would reverberate far beyond U.S. borders. The announcement was not made in a vacuum. It was the culmination of months of mounting military activity as U.S. forces ramped up their presence and readiness in the region. Behind the scenes, intelligence agencies tracked cartel movements, and military planners prepared for a possible escalation. For years, U.S. anti-cartel efforts had focused primarily on intercepting drug shipments at sea. Navy destroyers and Coast Guard cutters patrolled vast stretches of ocean, targeting smugglers' vessels in high-stakes chases. These maritime operations became a familiar sight, with dramatic footage of speedboats and helicopters dominating the news. While these missions led to major seizures, sometimes tons of narcotics at a time, cartels proved remarkably adaptable. They shifted routes, upgraded technology, and found new ways to evade law enforcement, exposing the limits of a simile we're approaching that church. The cat-and-mouse game at sea was never-ending, and the flow of drugs continued. Increasingly, officials argued that the real problem lay on land, in the fortified strongholds, hidden labs, and command centers deep within cartel territory. These were the places where drugs were produced, leaders operated, and violence was orchestrated. The White House now frames the shift to land strikes as a necessary evolution in the fight against transnational crime. Instead of simply intercepting shipments, the new strategy aims to confront the cartels directly, dismantling their operations at the source and targeting their leadership. Naval operations, once the centerpiece of U.S. anti-cartel efforts, are now seen as just the prelude. The new directive calls for coordinated raids, destruction of drug labs, and the capture or elimination of cartel leaders, striking at the very heart of the criminal networks. This marks a far more ambitious and risky strategy than simply patrolling the seas. It means entering hostile territory, facing well-armed adversaries, and accepting the possibility of escalation. The US is betting that only direct action on foreign soil can break the cartel's grip. The world is watching to see if this bold new approach will succeed, or if it will draw America deeper into a dangerous conflict. The Trump administration's legal justification for military escalation centers on the Venezuelan gang Tren de Aragua. Designated a foreign terrorist organization in 2025, Tren de Aragua's label allows the U.S. to treat anti-cartel operations as counterterrorism, not just law enforcement. This designation enabled lethal strikes at sea and now paves the way for land operations. By linking the drug trade to terrorism, the administration claims a mandate for decisive military action, both domestically and abroad. Framing the fight as counterterrorism, not just a war on drugs, has set a new precedent for U.S. intervention. The new land strike policy was foreshadowed by a dramatic U.S. military operation in Caracas. On January 4, 2026, U.S. forces captured Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro and his wife, Celia Flores, in the capital. The operation began with targeted strikes to isolate Caracas, followed by a swift special forces raid on Maduro's residence. Maduro and Flores were quickly transported to the U.S. to face federal narco-trafficking charges. This unprecedented action demonstrated America's willingness to project power and enforce its laws abroad. The raid serves as a proof of concept for future land strikes, signaling that no leader is beyond U.S. reach. Following Maduro's capture, the Trump administration seized control of a large portion of Venezuela's oil industry. The U.S. announced it would take possession of up to 50 million barrels of Venezuelan crude, claiming it as collateral for damages from narco-trafficking. Officials argue this move will stabilize Venezuela and prevent oil profits from funding criminal activity. Critics, however, see it as economic conquest, an outright seizure of a sovereign nation's resources. Venezuela's oil, long central to its economy, is now at the heart of a new geopolitical struggle. The U.S. frames the seizure as justice, but many view it as opportunism under the guise of counter-terrorism. This bold move has sent shockwaves through global energy markets and diplomatic circles. The U.S. intervention in Venezuela, coupled with the controversial new land strike policy, has sparked a wave of fierce international backlash. Across the globe, governments, organizations, and ordinary citizens have voiced their concerns, with many taking to the streets in protest and demanding accountability from Washington. The world is now watching the United States with a mix of alarm and skepticism, questioning the motives and long-term consequences of its actions in Latin America. Russia and China, two of the world's most influential powers, have issued strong condemnations, labeling the intervention as a blatant violation of international law and national sovereignty. Both countries have accused Washington of orchestrating a coup in pursuit of Venezuela's vast oil reserves, warning that such actions could set a dangerous global precedent. Their statements have been echoed by other nations wary of U.S. intentions. Even key Latin American nations, including Brazil, have voiced strong opposition. Regional leaders warn that U.S. intervention risks destabilizing the entire continent, potentially triggering a humanitarian crisis as refugees flee violence and uncertainty. The fear of a wider conflict has prompted emergency meetings and urgent calls for diplomatic solutions. Critics, including political analysts and human rights organizations, argue that the U.S. is setting a dangerous precedent by intervening in resource-rich states under the guise of promoting democracy. They warn that such actions could encourage future interventions elsewhere, undermining global stability and trust in international norms. The Trump administration now finds itself increasingly isolated on the world stage. Many traditional allies and neighboring countries have distanced themselves, viewing the U.S. actions as illegitimate, reckless, and out of step with international consensus. Diplomatic relations have grown tense, with some leaders refusing to engage directly with American officials. The diplomatic fallout threatens to undermine U.S. influence throughout the region. Once seen as a key partner, the United States now faces growing skepticism and resistance from governments that once relied on its support. This shift could have lasting consequences for American interests in Latin America and beyond. Around the world, people are watching closely, wary of further escalation and the possibility of a broader conflict. International media coverage has intensified, with analysts debating the risks and potential fallout of continued U.S. involvement in Venezuela. In the aftermath, the United States faces a long-term challenge to rebuild trust, restore its legitimacy, and convince the world that it can once again be a responsible leader on the global stage. Mexico's response to Trump's announcement was swift and unequivocal. President Claudia Sheinbaum condemned the U.S. intervention in Venezuela, warning it could foreshadow similar actions in Mexico. She declared, "We categorically reject intervention in the internal affairs of other countries." Mexico's government signaled that any unilateral U.S. military action on its soil would be unacceptable and met with strong opposition. This rebuke places U.S.-Mexico cooperation against cartels in jeopardy. The Trump administration now risks alienating its most important regional partner. The relationship between the two neighbors faces its most severe test in decades. Despite criticism, the Trump administration defends its actions as vital to U.S. national security. Supporters argue that cartels and their state sponsors are waging chemical warfare on America, justifying a military response. By labeling groups like Tren de Aragua as terrorists, the administration claims a legal and moral obligation to act. Proponents say intervention is also humanitarian, liberating communities from violence and corruption. The capture of Maduro is presented as a step toward restoring democracy in Venezuela. Advocates believe only overwhelming force will deter cartels and corrupt officials. The hope, a safer America and hemisphere through decisive action. Critics argue the U.S. policy violates national sovereignty and international law. They warn that military strikes could destabilize entire regions, spark wider conflict, and cause civilian casualties. Past interventions in Afghanistan and Iraq are cited as cautionary tales of unintended consequences. Effective counter-narcotics efforts, critics say, require cooperation, not unilateral force. Alienating Mexico could worsen the drug crisis, not solve it. Many suspect ulterior motives, pointing to the seizure of Venezuelan oil as evidence of economic opportunism. This perception undermines U.S. legitimacy and fuels anti-American sentiment. Opponents see the policy as reckless, dangerous, and likely to backfire.